attractive. So our goal here is to talk a little bit from a sponsor perspective, from a developer's perspective, about the Mexican market, the trade-off between risk and reward here. We've had a lot of discussion already about those issues, many particular to Mexico and many not. We'll come back to them. Our goal here is to make this an entirely interactive panel, not just with me posing questions, but really everybody here. This is profitability, risk, and rewards is a subject on which I think everybody has an opinion, and so we welcome it. Please jump in at any time. My name is Steve Perlman. I'm with Real Infrastructure Capital Partners. We're a fund management company. We have a new fund which is focused entirely on renewable energy projects in Latin America. So this is a subject near and dear to my heart. I've been working in the development area for many, many years, both independently and with a lot of the major project development companies. On my left, your right, is Javier Chavarria. Javier is with GE. He's consulting. Javier is with General Electric Financial Services. He's based in Houston. He's involved in all manner of financing of projects in the region, and I think both at the equity as well as other debt products. Javier's been an investment banker to the energy industry and an originator for gas and power transactions for a large strategic investor. On my right, I have Raul Felix. Raul is the legal director for GDF Suez here in Mexico. He's an assistant general counsel for GDF Suez in North America and a former partner of Baker McKenzie, where he was responsible for the climate change and renewables practice. Farther, we have one further down to the left is Martin Romberg. Martin is with the DEG, based here in Mexico. He's been here for quite some time, in charge of the renewable energy business for DEG, energy efficiency, as well as the CDM projects. But between him and Javier is Don Marcucci. Don is with Westinghouse, or with Siemens, I should say. He's been with the company going back to the Westinghouse days. I think Howard mentioned his long career in the company, and he's worked in many of their product lines today. He's responsible for acquisitions in the wind power space in the Americas. So our idea here was to give each of our panelists a little time to respond to the prompt, to give a little bit of an indication on their views of the principal issues in terms of profitability versus risk in this market. And then we just want to open it up as we go to your questions. So please jump in. You want to do the honors, Raul?
Okay. Sure. First, let me put the disclaimer out there. Being the ethics officer, I have to mention that this is not the opinion of GDF Suez, it's my opinion. And I'm going to be talking generally in terms of what the different perspectives are. As a former practitioner, outside counsel, I had the opportunity to work in different projects. And one of the main points we wanted to clarify was, well, the kickoff question was very simple. Is Mexico still attractive? I mean, given all the regulatory constraints, barriers that had been described by others, and the development of new laws, would Mexico continue to be attractive? If I had to sum it up, I would say yes. And then qualify that yes, depending on what type of projects you're talking about. The projects in Mexico, I would say they're very profitable, but they're also very complex. Trying to deal with the state, the federal, and the municipal authorities, and then having to figure out how this project runs in a state-regulated type of market, it's something that poses additional challenges than in other markets. So in principle, it is possible to continue doing projects and grow in Mexico, yes, provided that we do certain, I would say, improvements in the regulatory framework that we're working on, and also if we clarify certain criteria that need to be clarified in terms of new investment. But I'll leave it there before getting ahead of myself.
Thank you. Javier, do you want to?
Well, good evening, everybody. I guess it's important to give you a little of what my perspective is. GE Energy Financial Services is an investor, a global investor in energy. Just in wind alone, we have invested around $7 billion. Most of that is in the U.S. We have invested in other locations, none in Mexico yet, although it's not for lack of interest or effort. You know, we are, I would say, mostly a financial investor. We are not a developer. That means that by the time we get involved in a project, a good deal of the early stage milestones have been completed in the project. It's closer to financial close, and we take a construction risk. We don't take that much of development risk. So perspective is important because obviously as you move further down the development stage, returns get slimmer and slimmer. What we have seen in other parts of Latin America, Brazil, for example, is great interest in the sector. A few thousand megawatts of projects under development and PPAs signed in the last maybe 3 years, and that has driven returns to levels that are, at least in my opinion, in some cases, hard to justify, given the risks that are still, I believe, inherent in this industry. I would agree with Raul. I think in Mexico you still find, you're still able to find the right project with the right risk profile and return combination. As I said, we are a financial investor, and therefore it's even a little more difficult for us to find the right opportunity and come in at the right time where the project has still an attractive risk-return profile. But again, that's the job that us principal investors always have to deal with, finding those right projects. I would say that for us it is key to partner with experienced developers. All of the challenges, I'm sure we'll talk about a few, and I'm sure you've heard about lots of them during the day. It makes a huge difference if you partner with somebody that has the expertise and is able to navigate the system and ultimately solve problems and get projects to completion. I would say it mitigates a good portion of the risks that are inherent in these projects. So we try. That is at least one of the major sources of mitigation for us, finding the right partner. I think one advantage that exists in this industry is that the construction phase, and I think somebody mentioned that in the previous panel, construction risk is not as high as in some of the other energy projects, maybe like a traditional thermal power generation plant or a transmission line, gas pipeline. I mean, there's always risk, but I think that once you're able to get the project to lay the first break in the ground and start the construction process, you are ahead of the game. So if you find a project with a reasonable rate of return and a good partner that takes you to that point, I think going forward it's a lot easier to navigate.
As Steve said, I'm with Siemens Energy Inc. out of Orlando. Siemens is probably the youngest, oldest manufacturer of wind turbines. Siemens jumped into the business in 2004 when it bought Bonus Energy, which dates back to the beginning of the wind turbine business in Denmark. We've introduced that mom and pop operation to being a big business, and We started out with 0 megawatts in the Americas in 2005, and this year we're doing close to 3,000 megawatts in the Americas in 12, mainly pushed by the fact that the PTCs are potentially expiring in the U.S. at the end of 12, so it rushed a lot of projects into 12 that maybe weren't going to be 12 projects, but are trying to capitalize on PTC. And to address kind of the initial question, I think the returns are not only going down for the sponsors, but they're clearly going down for the manufacturers. And I don't think it's limited to Mexico. I think it's around the world. But I think Mexico has one thing going for it that you don't even find in the U.S. I think they've come up with a more consistent, stable policy and regulations for renewables. And like, as in the U.S., we go through the boom and bust cycle every time PTC is about to expire and is maybe brought back at the last minute, too late to salvage the following year, or comes back after a gap of made retroactive, which kind of just creates this up and down cycle. So I think, and we've been forced to help sponsors with different ways of doing things, more or less developing partnerships between the sponsor and the supplier, and been forced to do some things that where we are actually financing 1,000 megawatts of wind for one sponsor through selling receivables. We got together with Siemens Financial Services and a number of banks, and we actually sell receivables to the banks to get our money from the banks. And the customer actually doesn't pay other than the first 10% for the first 3 years of the project. So, you know, because the returns are going down, we're trying to find new and different ways to keep projects going forward. We just did sign our first contract in Chile, thanks to our colleagues on the previous panel for financing that, because that allowed us to sign the contract for the biggest wind farm in Chile. So I think the industry is facing a challenge with returns, but it's not something that can't be overcome with the various entities working together.
Yeah, hello. And maybe some words first to DG, because usually nobody knows us. Although our mother KfW Group in Germany is the third biggest bank in Germany, AAA rated and even bigger than the World Bank. KfW is the second biggest development bank or group in the world. We opened an office in Mexico covering Central America, the Caribbean, and Mexico itself in 2003. We have some interesting experience gained in the last years from a lenders and sponsors perspective in the wind sector. We co-financed Grupo Acciona, the Euros wind farm. So I even had the pleasure to join the due diligence, social and environmental due diligence as well. So I talked even to some of the farmers, which is very interesting view. Being a banker from Mexico City, then talking to farmers, that's another topic. Maybe if we could talk about project issues later on. And we purchased together with the Santander ACS team, which is the equity or specialized equity team from Santander, Mexico. We purchased a wind farm from Grupo Navalia, Demex 2 to be specific, 137.5 megawatts. Last year in December, so now we are officially shareholders of a wind farm, which is even more challenging to deal with all kind of, I would say, issues. The IRR is still acceptable. We being DG, we have always two hats on. One is the development hat, the other one is the make the money hat. So I think Mexican and Brazilian markets are still attractive, although in other markets, especially in Asia or even Africa, project IRRs are much higher than in Mexico. But I think developers, suppliers of machinery and equipment, as banks, we are just, everybody's willing to take those risks. And I think there are going to be more projects, and since we learn, everybody learns in this country, I think we are going to continue taking those risks. If you have more questions, I would say.
I do, Steve. Let me, just before you go around again, question for Martin and also for Javier. Just give us an idea in a month, how many new projects cross your desk looking for money in the renewable area, and how many of those are actually in Mexico?
Well, I look at all of Latin America, so I don't know, probably 4 or 5 projects in a month. You know, as the ones that we get to take a look at. I guess typical in development in the investment world. Of those 4 or 5, maybe 3 or 4 are too early stage, or have serious deficiencies. Maybe headed in the right direction, but still with a lot of work to do, at least from our perspective. Not sure how many get done exactly, but I guess just looking at the market and how it behaves. I think it goes in cycles. I think it's difficult to measure that, and so many projects get done in a month or in a quarter. Donald was talking about cycles in the U.S. I think there are driven maybe by different reasons, but in Latin America and Mexico, no exception. There may be other reasons, whether it's a CFE bid or the fact that a lot of people jumped into Oaxaca to develop sites, and then those projects come to market within the same 6 to 12 month period, and then it dries out for a year or so. But I would say, the activity definitely has picked up. We see more and more. You ask about renewables. It's not only wind, but biomass and some other types of hydros and other types of renewable energy as well.
Good question, actually. Well, since DEG is public, almost semi-public, I only work 10 days a week. No, a month. No, I'm kidding. No, the thing is, I met
that many?
But there's no bonus. Well, I made calculations. I think since I'm covering this area of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and CDM projects, I had about 1,000 meetings in the last 2.5 years. Because
1,000?
1,000 meetings
Wow.
of all this. Yeah, I just counted them in my Outlook, and just to think more or less. And in DEG we have only 23 clients, including not renewable energy clients. So I think it's about 5-6 clients since I started. So that's a nice ratio, I would say. But I would say it's definitely 1 project a day, but that implies energy efficiency. For example, if there's a cement producing company buying new equipment, or even in the sugar industry, if they buy more efficient boilers, well, then that even qualifies for us as energy efficiency projects. So I would say 1 a day. Wind farms, not that many. Although I see the trend that there are going to be more and more smaller or middle-sized wind farms between maybe 50 and 100 megawatts, which is a nice thing, because these huge wind farms are connected with huge problems sometimes as well. I think even Acciona didn't have too much fun working with the IFC in the lead, and IDB, and Bancomer, and EG, and CAP. So it's complicated structures, complicated deals. I would say one a day, and some small mini hydro projects are coming up more and more, because we financed so far not 1 in Mexico. We are about to finance 2 right now, but we have much more experience in Panama, Costa Rica, and Guatemala in the hydro sector, and there are more projects coming up.
And when these projects come in, how good are the renewable developers at bringing in a project with a financing plan, or do they come in and say, here's our project, here's our unleveraged return without debt, help us explain to us what type of financing is available and where we can go with the return from there? Is the renewable market savvy about financing? Because now in the United States, really the renewable developers, they're practically bankers.
Yeah, I wish it would be so. No, the thing is, it depends very much. If it's an engineering company, then they usually don't bring financial statements, since they don't like them so much. If it's another bank, then of course they have the whole package. If it's a project developer, usually they're used to have this kind of information package done. What we always like to ask, this is the financial projection, of course, a resume of the project, PPA at least, not a signed PPA, obviously, but at least an idea. If it's a AAA company, if the amount is denominated in pesos and dollars. Of course, EPC contract, so we need the whole package to analyze. And usually nobody brings it in the first day. But depends very much on the size.
I'm going to just stick on this point for a minute and we'll move on. I'll let Steve move on. But it's a good point. You say you're looking at the PPA and looking for a AAA credit, or you're looking to see what the credit is behind the PPA. And our understanding, at least mine, is people like yourselves are supposed to be helping the projects that can't find the AAA, that the commercial banks and the commercial market is clearly there for that type of credit. We had IFC before, where part of their goal is to help develop an industry that maybe doesn't have the best credits yet. So what's your perspective and what happens in those situations?
The developing world. Well, I mean, it happened that I myself connected, this was a small mini hydro project, for example. I connected them to our KfW Carbon Fund and to CDM project developers, and then we made a CDM project out of it, as an example. But you're completely right, but at the same time, coming back to the topic, DG is a development bank, but at the end of the day, it's a bank. So, and as you can see, we took a lot of risk together with Santander, I would say, in purchasing the wind farm, which is not ready to construct yet. It's close to ready to finance completion, but well, we certainly we try to be flexible, but again, DG 400 employees, well, 348 or something, most of them at Cologne. They're coming in projects from 93 countries a day, and they turned out to be little cherry picking. So we really have to I mean, fulfill our function as first filter of the projects, and we take the risks, but projects have to be well, they have to be serious, and at least there must be PPA, because if we help I could of course refer to Walmart, Bimbo, Cemex, to contacts, but whenever there's a huge wind farm developer coming in, they usually have those contacts already, so or they are the experts. They know Vestas and Nordex and Siemens better than I do. So in wind farms, there's no so much help needed, I think.
I know I said that was my last question, but you prompted one more for me. If somebody comes in without the AAA PPA credit, does that become a question of we lend or we don't lend, or we will lend with a higher spread and interest rate? So is your decision we do or we don't lend, or we will adjust the interest rate and spread accordingly?
Well, both. Since the PPA is only one part of the puzzle, I would say we certainly take it into consideration. But if it's not a AAA company, as long as the PPA, I mean, there's so many Mexican companies, middle-sized companies, which are, according to me, big as well. So, of course, we have to take the PPA seriously, and if the quality is, but if the PPA is not stable enough, then we would not proceed with the project, rather than adjust interest. Because if it's a good one or a bad one, and if it's a very good one with a serious company, stable cash flow, then we are going to accept it.
Your panel.
Okay, thank you, Howard. And please, anybody else who has a question, put up your hand and Howard will bring the mic. Look. Oh, okay.
Thank you. Mauricio Llamas from Bravo, Mexico. Many times we are asked to provide budget on cost of environmental compliance for projects in Mexico. And I wanted to know your opinion, or if it's even possible to have an estimate in a percentage of the total cost of a project that refers to what we may call the green cost of the project. And we have some experience in other types of projects, renewable energies, is emerging, but is there any way to establish a range of a percentage of the total cost of the project or that's applicable to the green cost, I mean for environmental compliance and follow-up of programs, etc.?
That's tougher than my questions.
I'm not sure that there's a fixed answer applicable in every case, and I don't want to mislead people by sharing any specific number. What we do, and the green or environmental cost, as you're saying, is going to vary also, from technology to the specifics of a site, technology, etc. So, we tend to hire consultants, work closely with the project, benchmark with other projects. As I mentioned before, we've done around $7 billion of equity investment in wind, and probably another couple billion in other renewable technologies. So we have a large portfolio to benchmark with, and if we come across an opportunity that has a specific situation, the first thing we're going to do is go back to our portfolio team and try to find a similar situation, and again benchmark and try to learn from there. But again, I wouldn't risk just giving you a specific number.
Yeah, I would add to that. I don't think that there's any sort of established methodology for deciding what's a green cost and what's not. Some costs are obvious. The cost of preparing an environmental impact assessment, I guess, falls in that category. And other costs are probably result from that. You may determine that as a result of that, you need to reposition wind turbines because the noise of the wind turbine is causing too much impact on a local community. There's a cost to that, but probably nobody adds it up and really tallies it, so no one knows what it is in the end. I think it's a slightly ambiguous number, but it's absolutely there. I just don't think that there's any standard method for getting at it.
And the complexity of the question, I think, it ties in 2 points. If you're looking at the methodology to evaluate the environmental impact that a project may have, sometimes our consultants will focus only on the regulatory aspects. And really, it's hard to put a price, and being honest on this, to, for instance, biodiversity. Okay, you're going to be modifying a river because you need to have a hydro, which makes complete sense, but you're going to be, for some reason, impacting some local flora or fauna. How do you evaluate that? Okay. The World Bank had put out some guidelines specifically trying to address this type of questions. But to this point, and although we have different methodologies to assess, for instance, the impact of the reduction of fossil fuels versus using alternative fuels or renewable energies, you can quantify the carbon emissions that you're not going to be generating because of the project, but doing an overall assessment of the entire project is something that we haven't gotten there yet. It's not that the developers are not looking for that correct valuation of the impact of the project, is that there are different criteria that I think, due to the point of where we are in discussions, have different points of view. So I would share Stephen's comment.
I've got a question. We have one strategic investor here whose company develops projects from greenfield, and a financial investor who enters the project at a slightly later stage. We had a number of discussions earlier in which the different models for contracting or selling power were discussed. And I guess from each of your perspectives, which of the 3 principal models holds out the greatest potential for renewable energy development in Mexico? The IPP model adapted to renewable energy, the self-generation or self-supply model, or the small producer model?
I think really the three options are viable in terms of having projects being developed under them. The main point there to consider is when you're talking CFE, you're reducing the counterparty risk. Really, you know you're going to have a solid backer, because ultimately it's the state, that will allow you to monetize those projects easily. And the off-taker is known and it's easy to work with because the regulations have been established. So in terms of level of risk, you know it, but also you're competing against different developers for that. So your return is not going to be quite high on those specific projects, because that's the whole point of having a public bid, to have an independent producer scheme operating. When you're talking about the self-supply, you're basically betting on a lot of factors. So it's not impossible, but it's harder to actually quantify the level of risk than with CFE. Still, they're attractive in certain cases. When you're talking about the new model of a small production, that could work if you find projects that have good transmission access. I mean, you can have 1,000 projects of 30 megawatts throughout the country if you have points where they could interconnect easily. Because what would kill those projects is actually the cost of having to develop the transmission lines all the way where the resource is located. So I think each one of them have different advantages and disadvantages. And for a developer's perspective, it would depend how we actually establish those incentives and manage them in order to make those projects more attractive.
Raul, just to follow up on Steve's question on that, as a strategic investor for those three different programs, given your size, are some of the programs less interesting because just of the size of the project? So I think part of Steve's question is for the larger investors, as we view and Javier there, how really interesting is the 30 megawatt program to you? Or is the program, and this, I have some heads shaking because this question was really asked before in an earlier panel, on the financing side, but now on the equity side, how interesting is it really when an investor shows up at your door saying, here's a 19 or 20% IRR on 26 megawatts versus a 14% IRR on 180 megawatts. So, I mean, given the profiles, what is really interesting?
It's always easier to manage a larger project because it's one risk concentrated that you can analyze more carefully than have 100 projects to review that each one has particular risk portfolios. That's an easy question to answer. I mean, if you look, bankers or investors or developers would look for larger projects because they're easy to manage in terms of project management skills. Basically, the resources you have are limited. But I wouldn't limit the potential to find investors that find that certain alternatives, for instance, in Mexico, there is cogeneration projects that we have sponsored or acquired. And a lot of companies do not feel that that would be a great idea, but still, we found that niche was interesting for us at that time. So it doesn't preclude you from going from one smaller type of project that could be replicated and have several of them invest in it.
That's a good point. Before we go to Javier, because I think I have an idea what his answer is. For DEG, what is your perspective? Somebody brings you 2 megawatts or 100 megawatts. Do you evaluate that the same way? And what is your charter?
That's an easy question to answer, actually, because we can never take more than 30% of the whole equity stake, and we can never offer less than $8 million and never more than $35 million. So now you mentioned 30 megawatts. 30 megawatts, 2 megawatts would be way too low, but 30 megawatts, so let's say wind power projects, $60, $70 million, and then maybe only 20%. They're looking for only 20% or 20% equity and 25%, and then of this portion only 30%. So then you're around at $5 to $8 million, I would say. So that's acceptable. If it's too large, not good enough for us, at least, or too big for us. If it's too small, it's just too small. So that's kind of easy if you can take maximum 30%, and it's, I would say, average between 20 and 30% in terms of percentage, well, and in terms of amount, I think the average investment of DEG equity investment would be around $10 to $15 million worldwide, including wind projects in Mexico. So that's how we see that issue.
Javier?
Well, first, with regards to Steve's question on the three models, I think that the Mexican market needs all three of them. And now we see that there's a good number of projects representing each of these models. Because of the type of market that we have here, with CFE, state-owned and in control of the power market, you're always going to have some combination and some activity driven by CFE. In terms of what is more attractive to us, again, it's a matter of finding the right situation and partnering with the right developer that may have an advantage. IPPs are typically very competitive. Returns tend to be lower, but again, especially on wind, and this doesn't apply to other technologies. Howard mentioned the Novo Pemex deal. We are partners in that project with Abengoa. Very difficult to get a clear advantage in something like that. Whereas in some of the new IPPs that are coming out, if you have spent 5 years developing a site, you may have a location that is advantageous because you're closer to a main transmission line. Again, there may be a small advantage. Clearly, on either one of the other project types, returns could be a little bit more attractive. They obviously require a little more work. So we try to keep a balance and take a look at everything that is going on in the market and try to find the right spot for us. And then quickly on the question about size, as you can imagine, GE tends to look at larger projects. We're being financial investors. We stay with minority stakes, so up to, let's say, 49% of the equity. But the minimum ticket size that we look for is around $25-30 million. So your question, if I get a call about a 20% IRR, 10, 20 megawatt project, I guess I'll call Martin. I don't know.
You can call me. Another question, this one for anybody who cares to take it on. We had some discussion about the credit related to self-supply projects, in which there were several very good credits buying the production from a wind project. I guess everyone loves diversification unless the alternative is having one AAA off-taker who takes it all. And I know, Raul, your company has at least one cogeneration plant in which you have, I think, 3 off-takers, but more than 30 different facilities receiving the power. My question is, is it a model that would work to just increase the number of off-takers in a self-supply project to the point where you have enough diversification in your customer base that you mitigate risk outright? Is that something that you guys would find appealing?
Thanks. Actually, we were about to finance 3 hydro plants in Mexico, and they had 5 different off-takers each. And AAA off-takers even, including some international car producers. So as long as the PPAs are acceptable, you diversify risks, and that's feasible and acceptable for us at least.
Well, what we tend to do is, in addition to the portfolio approach, is also to look at the merits of the project and whether it's maybe cost advantage or the necessity of the off-taker to have that power. So if it's essential for them and you have an off-taker that has invested $1 billion in a new facility and they're buying maybe $20 million of power from you every year, that sounds like a good combination. It's something essential for them that otherwise their $1 billion investment is not going to work. So they may not be AAA, but I guess the fundamentals are solid in that case.
Any questions from the room?
Yeah, Jack.
Jack?
Hi, I may sound obsessed with this question, but I'm looking for answers. One of the things that we are struggling as a financial institution to get our head around is, again, wind projections, and very curious on equity position on that, because equity is first loss, and on what types of solar technology would you invest in on the basis of what we're seeing in terms of financial results from, for example, First Solar, for example, that announced a really bad Q1, and then you ask yourself, all right, this is where you got to take a step back and think about, is this company going to be around for a while to service the technology? So really interested in your perspectives on the technical side as to what technologies you would invest in on the solar side, and what is your approach on wind forecasting?
Are you directing that to anyone in particular or the panel?
Everybody.
Well, basically, in terms of technology, you look for technology that has been proven. You don't go for technology that is just state of the art, that is being proven, because you just don't know if, as you mentioned, the developer will continue to be operating or belly up in 5 years. So whenever you try to go to the guarantee, there may be no one to claim for that guarantee. That's a reality that I would think large investors would look for. In my prior life, I remember assisting smaller companies that were coming up, and they were willing to take the risk of new technology because they would yield better returns. But that, in practice, also generated that the banking institutions would be very conservative about them, because they would look at them with a grain of salt and say, yes, this may be the solution 20 years from now, but first you need to show me that you're going to be here in 20 years or 5 years. So it becomes a catch-22, because whenever you have an entrance or new technology coming into the market, it takes a while for it to be proven somewhere, and you don't want to pay the price of being the pioneer and just burn yourself up. I would answer that question and leave the other one for someone.
Well, I'll take a shot at it also. I think you have certain advantages with a lot of the renewable technologies in that if your fear is that the supplier is going to disappear and won't be there to support you in the future, if you stick with relatively proven technologies which have a lot of experience, then I think you're not facing a great likelihood of a systematic failure of an entire facility. That's very, very unlikely to happen. What's likely to happen is one wind turbine fails and the manufacturer doesn't exist anymore. So, and that's a manageable risk. And the same in the solar space. I think you may have localized failures. You may have to replace panels, but probably you can buy them from somebody else. So there's a measurable financial risk or a manageable financial risk, in my view, much better in renewables generally than in large-scale thermal, for example, where if something goes wrong and the supplier doesn't exist anymore, you may have to find some guys who are good at metal work in their garage to fabricate you a new one.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I guess the one question, and this will show that I'm trained as an accountant, not an engineer, is that in the case of solar the drive to cut costs. So you have companies that are effectively moving production. There's a constant focus on trying to tweak things. I don't know if they're tweaking things in manufacturing process or design itself, whereby you're trying to bring the cost down. So the question I ask myself, and again, I don't know, I've not been tracking this technology for a while, but is that I understand that in the case of wind, there are companies like Vestas has been around forever, and so there's an aging profile that has been established. But the question is that it looks like in the case of solar technology, we're still to a certain extent at the design level. So the question is, if somebody had to take a 15-year view, do you have that aging profile in this technology that you have in wind? So,
I think the answer is yes. In the PV business, there may be some people from the industry here who could answer more better than I, but I think in the PV industry, absolutely, there's quite a lot of history and experience with the decline of the performance of equipment. With some of the more, new and less developed technologies, I guess the experience is less. And I know some of the manufacturers have actually looked to insurance solutions to provide some backstop to that. Did you guys have any?
On the concentration solar projects, for instance, we're listening to the fact that we will have a similar structure to what the dedicated producer have right now, where they would pay for CapEx and part of the OpEx through a directive that it's about to be issued. Well, in that type of demonstrative projects, for instance, a concentration solar project of less than 30 megawatts, that would be the channel to actually put it in place and try it out, right? Because you're limiting your risk and you're actually sharing it with the off-taker that is CFE. So, I mean, there are alternatives to work with new technology, but I just wanted to put the potential benefits that new regulation may bring for them.
Well, I would say the easiest way would be to purchase German technique because it's going to last 1,000 years. But seriously, I 2 points on that. I think, first of all, in realizing photovoltaic PV projects, technology was never an issue. Actually, it's the risk is quite lower than you don't need Gerhard Hassan to tell you that the sun is shining the whole day in Sonora for the last 60 years. And the technology is quite old and proved, but as long as the costs are $3.5 to $4 million per megawatt installed, then it's kind of difficult to make the project feasible. That's the problem in Mexico still. And I met once one of the bosses of the renewable, I would say department of TÜV Rheinland. TÜV Rheinland being one of the biggest certification companies in the world. And this guy was 65 years old, but he invented and they implemented an aging sort of PV testing machine. So he was like, you will see, it goes here in, it comes out after 10 minutes and it aged 20 years. So it's possible. And he told me that even Chinese people, that even Chinese manufacturers, the quality is great right now. That's probably why all the German companies went broke last week, or some of them. But I think the technology issue is not a problem at all, especially compared to the type of project. Wind, and then you have social problems. I mean, 95% of the investment costs are just the panels, 85% installation. Then you need somebody who cleans them once in a while, I would say. But I don't see any problems in that.
Let me just make the commercial. I think it depends on who you're buying the new technology from. If you buy it from a Siemens, a GE, somebody who has the deep pockets to stand behind it, rather than Joe Blow, who's a one man in a fax machine, you got a better chance that maybe the technology isn't going to work right the first time, but the big guys are going to stand behind it and find a way to make it work. So I mean, I think just because it's new technology doesn't mean you should shy away from it. You just got to be careful on how you buy it.
How willing, Don, while you're on that, how willing are the big guys to put their money into the equity of some of these projects, either to make them happen or to make lenders comfortable? Is that still something, or is wind such a mature technology now that it's no longer necessary?
There's still a lot of projects out there where the banks, the people providing the debt, are looking for some indication from somebody connected with the supplier, be it a Siemens Financial Services or Siemens Fire Ventures in our case, that they look for them to participate a little bit either in the bank syndicate to provide the debt financing, or even in equity in the case of Siemens Fire Ventures, to put some money behind it, which gives them more assurances that, hey, this is going to be a successful project that helps us go forward. Or in the case of, this was mentioned earlier, on the Chile project that was just signed and financed, the EKF out of Denmark actually put some money into that project because some of the equipment, Siemens equipment, was coming from Denmark. So that, again, gave some assurances that the company, the country, or whatever, has something into this project that helps the banks go forward. As I mentioned previously, we actually have been involved in 1,000 megawatts of two separate contracts with a big developer, where we actually, they don't pay anything for almost 3 years, because we basically are taking a receivable from them and then selling it to a syndicate of banks, and the first time through for 600 megawatt projects. And then the second time, we actually were able to convince Siemens AG to take an equity position, or not an equity position, but finance roughly half of the turbine purchase price, and then again sold receivables to the banks to make the project go forward.
Let me ask just to follow up before we get to this question. Since you started in the nuclear industry, and in my opinion, the capital cost of those plants never really justified building them, and I think still a lot of the renewables, particularly concentrated solar, as Raul was just mentioning. It's hard to see that the capital cost really does justify building these. Nonetheless, we have sponsors willing to do it. What's your feeling on that? Is this something that's justified, or are we going to slip back towards gas when these plants start to be so expensive that we can't afford them?
Are you referring to all renewables, or just wind, or?
Let's start with wind. And
I think there are cases now where wind is competitive with gas. You see some plants, some farms in Oklahoma, where their cost is about equal to some of the gas plants. And I know gas is low now, but there is and that's mainly because of fracking and the shale gas. But there is a lot of places where fracking is going to become more expensive because they're coming up with regulations, and they banned it in New Jersey for a year. They say it's causing some earthquakes in Ohio. It contaminated the water in Wyoming, and Pennsylvania just proposed, I think, 95 regulations for fracking. So I think the gas, rather than staying where it's at or even going lower, is going to be coming up, and that will make wind really competitive. I mean, I think it can almost stand on its own with gas right now in a number of places.
That's a good point. Let me stick on that for a minute, because we brought it up this morning, and you heard from Iberdrola and Acciona. Yes, wind may be putting it in these places, but when you consider where the load is, particularly in Mexico, is the load really in Oaxaca? So is wind really competitive when you consider the cost of transmission in these areas, or what's your feeling?
I think really it's kind of the same for a lot of the other renewables. I mean, you're not going to build a nuclear plant in the middle of New York City. You're going to build it somewhere, and you're going to transmit.
That's in Poughkeepsie.
Yeah, it's close some places, but you're going to transmit the power there.
Yeah.
Same with wind, offshore. I mean, you're not going to build them, 500 feet off the the shoreline, and you're going to transmit it. But unfortunately, I think most of the renewables are not where the
Right.
load is. But I think we have to find a way to get it there.
Good. We had one more San Diego question here.
Question on warranties. In the solar PV business, the big panel manufacturers have now presented long-term warranties as part of their marketing pitch and part of their competitive advantage. The big Chinese, and before that, the Kyocera's of the world have done this sort of thing. Are you seeing any movement towards a full wrap warranty where a panel manufacturer will say, so long as we have a say on the O&M and the EPC, we will guarantee output for 20 years?
Anybody have an answer?
No. German answer. What we, as being a bank, usually we are asking for financial and technical completion, usually, but only for 2 years. And of course, we'd like to see maybe a paragraph in the EPC contract, especially in the O&M contract. First of all, we'd like to have O&M contracts at least for 5 years, if it's possible, at least for the time the bank is going to be in the project. But that includes usually replacement of broken cells and things like this, but warranties for, 18 years, I didn't see that so far.
I can say in the solar deals that we do, we generally do see on the modules, and we do see easily 20, 25-year warranties. It's not hard to get. The question the bankers always have is, as Jaya was saying, is that company going to be there? But in my experience, and I represent some solar contractors, it's really not a problem to get these warranties. And actually, the more aggressive, particularly from Asia, the suppliers, what I found is you can get any warranty you like. The question is, will the company be there? And I don't know how much the lenders are really valuing it, but we have people now, they seem to be so confident in their products. And also, they seem to be fairly easy to replace, even if you don't have a vendor in business any longer. You're not replacing, as somebody said, an entire gas turbine or an entire steam turbine. You're replacing some cells.
One of the things that's interesting, and the reason I raised the question, is a lot of developers, they want to put the project in place, and they'll hire the EPC, and then they want to bail out of it. And O&M is a lot less exciting, but the financing has to be in place for a long period of time. You have to have assurance of cash flow for a long period of time. So the module's warranty, and it is going to 20, 25 years, is very important, but there's a whole lot of pieces beyond that. Clearly, what the EPC did and the quality of that work, but then importantly, the O&M for that long period of time. And clearly, you've got to worry about the inverters too. So there's a whole package, and having a 20 or 25-year warranty from a module manufacturer covers an important piece of the puzzle, but it's certainly not the whole thing, which was the basis for my question.
I think that's a good point. One thing I should say to the sponsors, where we do see the 25-year guarantee, unfortunately, lenders, if you're not dealing with a vendor that's been around a long time, will require a warranty reserve in cash or a letter of credit, which really hurts a project's return. So I shouldn't say we can get them and it's easy. It actually is easy to finance them with that warranty reserve, which is really a cost of capital. So we see you can get them, but the lenders are still generally not comfortable. I think we have one more question.
I have a two-part question with respect to your relationships with project developers and the kinds of deals that you strike with them. I've heard from several members of the panel that you typically take minority equity stakes in the projects. Many of the projects, we have a financial advisory firm, and many of the projects that we see are developers who have done a lot of work, but obviously don't have a lot of deep pockets. So the two-part question would be, first of all, how much sweat equity do you recognize when you're dealing with these kinds of groups? And number two, the second part of the question is, if they need to come up with some cash on their end in order to make the project click and come together, then where would you point them? In what direction would you point them to find that equity? Thank you very much.
Well, first, with regards to the question of sweat equity, I guess it depends on how much sweat there has really been. So, again, different in every case, but we do recognize that there is a lot of value, and that's why project developers take those risks, right, to get the kind of promotes or fees or sweat equity, as you put it. So it's again, it's going to be different in every project, but what you end up doing is just running the financial model and trying to establish what is a reasonable number that still yields an attractive rate of return and certainly a return to the developer that makes sense. And there's always a little bit of negotiation. But I guess the principle is, yes, there's always value in the early work. With respect to the source of additional funds, again, the reason why we prefer to be a minority is because our role is more, as I said, of a financial investor. So whereas even when GE has the expertise, the technical expertise and the human resources throughout the company, that's not necessarily the case with our organization, which is part of GE Capital. So we're relatively passive investors. Maybe during construction we stay a little bit closer to the action in case something needs technical assistance. We obviously, somebody in GE will find a solution, and we're always happy to facilitate those discussions. But at the end of the day, we're looking for somebody that has the expertise, that has done it before, that has a track record, and that is going to be there day to day on the execution phase. When the developer has intention to stay in the project, but he doesn't have the equity required, we can propose to bring in another partner. And we have done this with other projects. We have developed good relationships and successful projects with other partners that have that expertise that we look for. So again, if the developer is open to that, then we can propose to bring the whole package, right? Not only the financial investor, but a partner that also certainly that partner most likely is going to look for a significant role in the partnership, because typically they are either strategic or again, some have, because of their expertise, they have they have interest in really managing the process.
Yeah, the same here. I mean, actually, and that's public information, we signed an agreement with Sobitech in Germany to develop together with them about 1,000 megawatts in wind farms in Latin America. And I think it's case by case what we expect from them in terms of equity. But as for example, I mean, Macquarie from Paninal, they bought the whole project. We purchased from Rodovalia the minority stakes, and then the remaining part. That's the way as well to deal with them. And then maybe in our case, that's the thing, they have the option to buy it back after 2 years. But so it's a kind of bridge equity solution. But what we always can do is as well refer to investment funds. We are shareholders in actually it's more 3 US investment funds which invest in infrastructure projects in Latin America. We're probably going to invest in Real infrastructure fund as well soon. It's purely coincidence that we are going to be clients, or you're going to be clients of ours. So that will be our first address as well. And as Javier said, your experience and your hands-on management, and we get the money together in the market, hopefully.
Okay, I've got a question. Having recently completed development of a couple of wind farms in the Dominican Republic, I found one of the most effective risk mitigation strategies against hurricane risk is frequent prayer. And so far it's worked perfectly, but as we have more and more wind development in regions exposed to that risk, what do you guys think the potential impact is?
Well, I think it will depend on how you manage it. For instance, there are certain insurance companies that may not be replacing that or have a very high premium on some insurance that could provide for the replacement of key equipment. But really, it depends how you allocate risk, really. If you're planning to have that project, you need to consider that that's in some cases it will be uninsurable, and they would decide, this is just an area where you're basically on your own, and that will increase your risk towards the eyes of a lender, because you will be backing that project with your own funds. So, I don't have a perfect answer for that.
How do you guys feel, Don, as a vendor?
I personally am surprised by everybody's concerned over hurricane areas. Even internally within the Siemens Wind, the engineers are all concerned. But nobody seems to care when you put these things in Tornado Alley in Oklahoma and Nebraska and Iowa and Kansas. With the hurricanes, you got a warning that they're coming. I mean, we require that a generating system be put in place at the wind farm so that you can turn turbines out of the wind and that. So you have a chance to prepare for the hurricane coming. You don't have a chance to prepare for the tornado coming, usually. But there seems to be this big concern about hurricanes, but nobody seems to ever mention, oh, you're putting that in the tornado zone. But that's my own personal feeling, not even the companies.
I guess another question I would raise in terms of the really the greenfield development, on the ground aspect. Security issues continue to be an issue in parts of Mexico. Is that affecting your company's efforts and your choice of projects and selection of regions to work in?
Okay, the general answer to that would be no, and then I will have caveats, because it really depends what you're doing. For instance, if you're just setting up a transmission line, or you have pipelines, so you have limited risk and exposure that you can manage for a period of time. If you're planning to have, for instance, a wind farm in an area where not even the police will get there or the army, then you're exposing yourself to higher risk, because that it's something that you need to consider actually on each individual project. So the response in general would be no, and then it would depend if you're going into a really problematic zone and one that would require a lot of people on the ground managing that risk, because then you will be exposing a lot of your workers.
Well, I think that there's some impact of this. I wouldn't say to the point where you wouldn't do projects or we wouldn't consider an investment. But as you take a project to an investment committee and you say, the site is in the middle of, Nuevo León or some Veracruz or Tamaulipas, one of these areas that are high risk at this point. Yeah, you can see, people looking at each other and wondering if, that's going to be an issue. I haven't seen, I'm not aware, but I haven't seen any project or investment that has not proceeded on the basis of this type of risk. I think it's in everybody's mind, and hopefully, we don't have the first incident that may change the view everybody has.
I would, we have one wind contract in Mexico, which we signed in 2009. Cynthia's laughing. But which has not been able to obtain financing yet, has not proceeded because of that. And as Martin said earlier to me as we were getting up here, it's probably the best known non-financed wind project. But I think it's been held back a little bit also, not necessarily in the beginning, but by the fact that they did find 70 bodies on the wind site, or very close to the site at one time. So I think that's led people to shy away a little bit in the financing end. It actually led us to shy away because we're doing the erection and all that if it ever goes forward. But now our security people are happier because they built a federal police station right across from the entrance to the site. So now they feel a little more comfortable with the security. So I think it can have an effect on projects' financeability and going forward.
We heard an interesting discussion earlier about the challenges of the permitting and concession process for small hydro projects. Are you guys, any of you guys, involved in any hydro project or have any experience with that? You want to comment on that topic?
Yes, also we have to hurry up a little. I think everybody wants to get around as possible. And in Mexico, yes, we are going to hopefully finance soon 2 mini hydros. Actually, we're going to finance the holding company and holds 100% of the shares of 1716 hydro. And we financed one of the biggest hydro projects in Guatemala, Hydro Chacpal, 94 megawatts. Cubayaji, that's a region in Costa Rica, and we're going to finance another one with them. So there is certain experience within the bank, not only on my desk. And the typical topic is always cost over, and I had the pleasure to travel together with an ex-former colleague who retired after 38 years of service in the EG. He pretty much did all the hydro projects in Latin America, and he told me there's always cost overrun, because since you built the tunnel, there's different stone. So that's the risk, and it's much more important to have a good EPC contract in hydro projects than in other ones. So that's our experience. Interesting projects, very stable. Once they are done or constructed, usually you have constant cash flows for 20 years, no problems at all. But environmental and social aspects during construction are important, and of course an EPC contract should be in place.
Howard Martin would like to order a beer. If you could send a note to the bartender.
I've ordered a German beer for him.
Any more questions, comments from the crowd?
Okay.
He wants a Mexican beer.
Yeah.
This is a question for the financial investors. In general, what are your minimum requirements as you sign into a shareholders agreement with the main, bricks and mortar developer? What are the sort of minimum voting rights that you typically tend to seek in which effectively go into operating decisions? Obviously, if the developer makes majority decisions on taking all the cash and paying them as a dividend, that's an issue. But is there something out of the norm that you typically insist on as you enter into shareholders agreements?
I think Howard would be better. Well, let me mention a couple things. As I said before, typically we partner with somebody that is bringing equity to the table. So if it's a small developer that didn't have the capability to fund their share, in addition to the sweat equity we already discussed, well, obviously that it's going to be very hard to concede any significant rights. As I said, we usually partner with somebody that has done this before, that has experience, and with right, we'll have will pursue control of the project. And we have no problem with that, given that we're working with somebody that not only has the experience, but is also contributing the majority of the equity. On that, I mean, typical minority protection rights, with events that are unusual or extreme, such as bankruptcy, maybe getting into any other type of business other than the project itself, maybe a refinancing or a payment of the debt, existing debt, sale of the company. I mean, things that are really major things. And then usually during construction, we look to have a right, to at least have a little bit larger say in things, in certain things, when it's clear and evident that something is going wrong. And the way in which you usually measure that is by looking at the independent engineer reports. So if there's something, a red flag coming up and something that might put you in a bad situation with the lenders or the project itself, then we look for a right to step in and do something to fix if that's something we can do. We usually work, when in those instances, in reality, you always end up working with your partners and trying to fix it together.
Yes, we certainly try to mitigate all the risks, and what you always can do is sign the shadow loan agreement and then put some condition precedents before disbursement. But I would say the most riskiest thing is PPA, EPC contract, O&M contract, and land rights. So that's probably one of the, I would say, key matters we have to take care of before disbursement. Sorry.
Any more questions?
Good. I think, Carlos, do you want to wrap it up, or do you want me to?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, let me say thank you to all the panelists. Had a very interesting day. I think it took us from the regulatory scheme and the law right into figuring out how to really get these projects done, and not only how to get them done, but how to keep getting them done given the environment of competition across all the areas, from the vendors into the equity providers. I think probably if we had done this 3 years ago in renewables, we wouldn't have all these larger players here at this table. So I think it's really been a lot of progress, and thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you in the morning.